there are about as many ways to learn things as there are things to learn. That's definitely an exaggeration, but seriously, depending on what you want to learn, maybe you would watch a tutorial or listen to a podcast or go meet with an expert in that field or watch a documentary or a movie, or you could go to college even, or take just at least a course, or meditate in the middle of a field to discover the inside of yourself and the depths of your soul, but And maybe you'll notice I didn't mention reading. Well, I'm about to. Welcome to Reason to Read number 3. It's the only way. Let me explain what I mean when I say it's the only way. Obviously, reading isn't the only way to learn, or even the best way to learn. All those other ways to learn that I mentioned are pretty terrific, and depending on what you're trying to learn, some are going to be more important. If you want to learn Photoshop, a YouTube tutorial is probably better than a book, and if you want to learn how to remove someone's appendix safely, a book might help, but I really hope you would have gone to college for that. I don't think it's the only way or even the best way to learn things in general. However, there are some things you can only learn from books. Let me explain. Let's say you want to learn about Chris Hadfield, Canadian astronaut, commander of the International Space Station for a time, truly inspiring and interesting guy. And you don't just want to learn about him, you want to learn from him. You want to hear what he had to say. Well, the good thing is you've got a number of options to choose from. He's got a bunch of YouTube videos from his time in space. He's got a TED Talk. He's got a Wired interview. There's even a cover of him playing Space Oddity by David Bowie in space, which is kind of cool. And then, of course, he does also have a book, which I've read and is super terrific. It's called An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth. I highly recommend it. It's a super interesting perspective on his time in space, but also it's got some applicable things for us here on Earth who will probably not be astronauts at any point. So that's really well and good, and we're super blessed to have that wealth of information and ways of understanding things. I'm really glad I have video footage of Chris Hadfield in space instead of having to read only his book. They complement each other very well. Now, let's say you want to learn from someone else who is maybe not as alive as Chris Hadfield. Maybe you want to learn from Benjamin Franklin in the 1700s, or Marcus Aurelius from earlier. Unfortunately for you, but fortunately for this video series, you will need to use a book because Marcus Aurelius did not have a podcast. Now, of course, you could learn about them without reading, right? There's this video, for example, where I'm explaining some concepts. You could have maybe gone to school and learned about them, but if you want to learn from those people, not learn about those people, you will have to read. Now, I really do want to make a distinction between learning from somebody and learning about somebody. Both are pretty good, and you can't always do the deeper dive of learning directly from somebody. And the idea of someone else summarizing and distilling information for you and just telling you about it is actually really important and really beautiful. That's what I'm doing here. But if Stoic philosophy, for example, is important to you, and you've maybe watched some YouTube videos on it and you really like what you're hearing, and you keep seeing quotes from Marcus Aurelius's meditations, if you want to do a deeper dive, you want to read the words of Marcus Aurelius himself in context in their entirety. I had heard about Ben Franklin my whole life. You hear about him in grade school, you hear about him with the key and the string and the kite, and he's got a funny hat, and I think I read a silly little book as a kid called Ben and Me about a mouse, I think, who was Ben Franklin's friend. This is coming back to me right now as I'm recording it, and the mouse lived in his hat. Anyway, basically my knowledge of him was either history that I was taught in school or quotes that I was taught in blogs or other things like that, people quoting him. I think he's the one who said, if we don't hang together, we'll all hang separately. Probably more profoundly than that, but something to that extent. I knew he wrote an almanac. I knew he had all these witty sayings. I started hearing people recommend him more for his checklist of virtues you may have heard of. He started talking about maybe I can become a perfect person if I just work on one virtue at a time, which, up in the air if you can do that, but it's a pretty interesting system. So I had heard about that, and I'd seen the chart represented, and I heard quotes from him, and finally last year I read his autobiography, and I truly felt like I understood Ben Franklin a lot better, and I understood all those quotes a lot better. Instead of just a bunch of disjointed facts about this person, I got to hear him narrate his life. There is something different about having Ben Franklin suggest by example that you should be frugal with your money and be a good business person and read books and not be too argumentative than hearing someone online like me tell you Ben Franklin said that. That version feels kind of prescriptive, like someone is explaining to you what to do and talking down to you and using a quote against you, or at least it could feel that way potentially, where when you're reading the book, you feel like the advice you're taking is your own. The same thing with Marcus Aurelius. There's a big difference between some guy online mind telling you that Marcus Aurelius wants you to wake up early, and learning from Marcus Aurelius talking to himself that it's a good idea to wake up early. Now, obviously the same thing would be true with a modern day author or artist of any kind. You'd get to know Malcolm Gladwell better by reading one of his books, like David and Goliath, than just hearing a random quote or blog post about it. So this isn't a case for old authors versus new authors, it's just we prefer when we have the chance to learn directly from somebody. I'm not knocking modern authors, and I'm not mocking modern methods of communication. I thoroughly enjoy Malcolm Gladwell's books, and I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to him on his podcast or in his TED Talks, and I even took his masterclass for a time in college. I went through that whole thing, and I liked all of those. And I'm supremely grateful I get to live in an age where I can enjoy Malcolm Gladwell's work and thought in all those different mediums. I'm so glad that I got to watch Randy Pausch's last lecture on YouTube, as well as read his book. In fact, I was able to watch the video before I'd ever even heard of the book. That's how I heard of the book. The greatest minds of today are sharing their thoughts in so many formats, including but not limited to books. And that's wonderful. But for some people, and it's a lot of people, it's the vast majority of supremely influential authors, thinkers, and writers in the history of humanity, you cannot learn from them directly in any way other than reading. So let me know down below who's someone that you know a lot about but you'd like to learn from, and then go check out online, see if they've got a book, see if they've written something, old or new, and enjoy learning from somebody without having to learn about them from someone silly like me sitting behind a microphone. See you next time in Reasons to Read number 4.